Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and I don't think that we're alone in the universe. Okay, let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey everybody, welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today. As always, I am Raymond, your host and Indianapolis wedding photographer. If you listened last week, you'll know that I said that I was in Iceland. I was on my way, and I would love to talk about my experience in Iceland, but I had to record this intro before we left since I get back today, the day that this goes live. So, hello from the past. Okay, but in all seriousness, if you are in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, I'm sure that you saw photos and maybe even participated in a few discussions there, because the group is consistently growing. It's growing, and it's just so much fun to have everybody new in there. And people just like you, they have questions, so you might have participated in some of those discussions. In fact, I brought on today's guest because members of the group like Fabiola and Hershey and Sarah and Holly have asked questions about birth and newborn photos that I just can't answer. So I simply looked for someone who could, and today I totally did. I found that person. I found that person who could answer those questions. Today's guest shares so much from her experiences shooting births, and she has this way of communicating that is just very nurturing and makes you feel like you're being taken care of and safe. And I can see why new moms really trust her so much. In fact, we got really comfortable talking, and I might have shared more than I should have in this episode. So look out for that. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But my point is that without the incredible members of the Facebook group who ask questions, I might not have went on the hunt for a birth photographer. And to tell you the truth, I am so glad that I did, because as you will hear in this interview, there's just so much that applies to every aspect of photography, and it's not just births. So if you don't shoot births, don't worry, because I know that you will still be able to take away some great tips today in this interview. And if you are a premium member of the podcast, you will hear the whole uncut interview where Ashely, it's very weird. It's not like I'm trying to hide the name, but I got to figure out how to take care of that anyway. You're gonna hear where the whole interview where she shares tips from how to book your first birth session. We spent quite a bit of time on that one. If there's any money in birth photography, since you're always on call and could be working for 30 plus hours. Yeah. Listen to how she handles that, and how to deal with emergencies in the room if something goes wrong. So if you're just a regular listener and you want to become a premium member to hear the whole interview with today's guest, just head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the link at the top of the page to join. Okay, that is it. We're going to get into this super action-packed interview right now with Ashely Diamond Siegert. Today's guest is a successful birth photographer who has been shooting professionally since 2011. A certified professional photographer and master photographer craftsman, I'm excited to hear how she brings the world of portraits to telling the story of a birth through photographs. Today, I'm talking to Ashely Diamond Siegert. Ashely, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Birth photography is one of those things that I am completely clueless about, which is, as the listeners know, my wife is actually an OB nurse. She goes every day. That's what she does. But as far as the photography side of it, I always have so many questions. It's hard to find somebody to turn to, and I know that the listeners ask questions as well. So today we're going to tackle some of those. But I mentioned, obviously, in your introduction that you are not only that have been shooting for a long time, many years, but you're also a very accomplished master photographer craftsman, which is an awesome title. But I know that you didn't start there one day. You didn't just wake up and, hey, here I am, I'm a master photographer. Can you tell me how you got your start in photography, and then why you decided to pursue these achievements or accomplishments or degrees as well?
Okay. So yeah, winding story, but my background, I actually have a degree in elementary education with a minor in American Sign Language. For a while,
really?
I was going to be an interpreter. Yeah. And then met a guy, moved to Texas. I was living in Atlanta. I moved to Texas, and we are just far enough from Austin where all the deaf people live in Austin because the School for the Deaf is there, and there's very few deaf people here. And so I was like, well, that interpreting thing might not pan out where we live. So when and my TV work, because at the time I was freelancing, was kind of, they didn't know I was out here, so they weren't hiring me out here. And so I turned to Craigslist and was like, I'm going to get a job. And I started working for a magazine, like a lifestyle magazine, and I was selling ads. And they said, hey, can you like get some good pictures of all of your clients for our website and our blog and all that kind of stuff, and some to go in the magazine. And I was like, well, if I'm going to get published right out of the gate, I should probably know what I'm doing. So I looked online and I signed up for a Camera 101 class at the local community center.
Oh, perfect.
And I fell hard down the rabbit hole and never looked back. So I started shooting in manual really from the very beginning, because that was how I started getting educated right away. And then from there, I started with a nonprofit in town called Preemie Prints, which does free shoots for families that have gone through the NICU process, neonatal intensive care. So I was in the hospitals a good bit. I was meeting all these families, tiny babies, learning to shoot newborns who were a little bit older because they had had to spend a lot of time in the neonatal ICU. So I got a lot of experience shooting newborns who were not in that first 10 to 14 day range that most newborn photographers try to stick to for those sleepy baby shots, which has served me well over time. And then joined the association, started second shooting for other photographers at weddings, and just kind of like getting everything I could. And one day, somebody came to our guild meeting, we have a PPA chapter here, and started talking about the CPP process, the Certified Professional Photographer process. And another girl in the studio or in the guild said, let's build a study group, and like, let's do this. And so that's how she and I met. We started as a study group, and by the end of that process, we were studio partners. And she is now a world-class boudoir and fine art nude photographer. Amazing. And so she and I shared 3 different studios over the course of three years before her husband was transferred away, but they just came back, so I got her back.
Friends again.
And so I got the CPP with her there, and then she and I actually really pushed each other over those 3 years. And one of those things we were pushing each other on was acquiring as many of the degrees as possible, because we saw so much improvement in ourselves getting that initial CPP certification. We saw so much growth in ourselves and each other that we just kept pushing each other. And actually, the Craftsman certification is a teaching certification. So you create a program and you go in and present it at different guild meetings all over the country. So we did all the guilds in Texas except for Lubbock, because that's really, really far away, and a couple in New Orleans, and we did some one-day courses and got all those merits, all those credits. And some of what we taught was actually how to share a studio, because we did not see anybody teaching those skills as well. And those are definitely skills.
I can imagine. I've never even I've never had my own studio. I can't imagine doing it and having like a roommate. I remember having roommates in college, and it was the worst. And I would imagine once you involve more money and business into that, it could really get messy. But I'm glad that you obviously could tackle it, and you were teaching others how to do it as well.
Yes. And we approached it very much as like a roommate marriage situation, but planning for the divorce, because eventually at some point you're going to have to separate for some reason. And so we were all set up for that when her husband got transferred. So it worked out beautifully. But so then we got our Craftsmen together. And so now we're all working on our master photography degree, which is a print competition merit base. So you enter your images into international print competition, and based on how many merits you get from those, then you get the next degree. So that's the last one that we have to tackle, and it's a beast. So
my goodness,
Yeah.
Growing up, a lot of people just grow up like with a camera in their hands, right? They just follow kind of that passion, and then they learn as much as they can, but a lot of times they don't have that formal education. And we work in an industry where we work in a world where somebody to cut your hair for $10 needs to be licensed and go to the state and have these be regulated. But to shoot a very important event, or photograph something and take large amounts of money, you need nothing. And I think that that's part of the appeal to a lot of photographers, is that there's a low barrier to entry. Excuse me. But in your eyes, what benefits have you seen most out of your accomplishments here?
I think with the certification, with the CPP, which is a technical certification, so in order to earn that, you take a written exam, and then you enter a portfolio of very specific images where they're looking for very specific skills to be covered. And so I learned how to shoot off-camera flash preparing my portfolio for review. So I had to learn from the very beginning how to do it right, so that people who have been doing it for 50 years could look at it and say, she nailed that lighting pattern.
Right,
so
right.
I never got to learn it wrong. So that was super helpful. And then from there, I have actually had gigs where it's been the difference between me and another photographer, is that they see that I have committed to that level of excellence. And I've had people where they don't even know what the certification is, but they're like, well, she's certified, she must know what she's doing. And then on the baby side, on the baby world, I've actually been able to build partnerships because, for example, the lactation consultant that I first got a large wall display in her facility, she was like, well, I had to go through a bunch of testing, and I have to keep my certifications up, and I have to be, top of my game. Why would I not partner with somebody that has those things in place, as opposed to somebody that doesn't, like if she's picking somebody? So occasionally it does happen to be the difference. And then sometimes, like, I've had people come in here who are, highly certified in their own industries. And when they if they ever question my pricing, I point to the degree on the wall, and I'm like, you got yours, I got mine, buddy. Like, we do what we got to do.
That's great.
And
That's
I'm like, touche.
Here we go. Who do I make the check out to? Let's do this.
Exactly.
I love it. I'm interested. You said a few things there, like when learning off-camera flash, you never got to learn it wrong. And that's such a great quote, and that's definitely going to be in the show notes for this episode. I never got to learn it wrong. That's so interesting to think about, because as photographers, a lot of times we go about this on our own, and we do have to learn things wrong. But I'm interested in, what was the hardest part of photography for you to learn from the technical standpoint?
I think something that we all struggle with, especially, I would say a solid percentage of the industry right now is women who have gotten a camera somewhere in their mid to late 20s, when they are leaving the workforce with children, or they're trying to supplement so that they can maybe get out of whatever job that they're doing. Mm-hmm. And most of those people, and not a complete generalization, but I know the category that I have fallen into, and many of my students have fallen into, is that they're artistically minded with very little business education. And so from a technical standpoint, I think the right-brained artist struggles with lighting math. So inverse square law, how light works, how the lens and the crop sensor versus the full frame sensor, like the math on all of that can get very jumbled. And then on the other side, the business math and spreadsheets, and we end up shying away from it and just wanting to learn how to make pretty things. But then we're like, okay, but I want to make a business out of it. But then don't really want to do the research on how business needs to work in order to be sustainable, because we just want to make pretty things. And so it's getting over that fear of numbers, really, honestly, I think is the biggest thing. And so it's definitely something I went through. And once I just made the decision to like hardcore get over it, then the world kind of opens up and you sit down and you're like, I'm going to sit here until I figured this part out. I'm going to sit here until I understand the focal length of a lens. I'm going to sit here until I understand crop sensor, reduction. And I'm going to sit here until I understand how a histogram works and like all that kind of stuff that a lot of artists don't want to play with. Or if they do, they want to like get it really fast and be like, okay, but close enough, as opposed to like nail it right. And then you don't have to think about it because it's second nature.
Right. Oh, that's so smart. I love to hear that. Just because it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, it's good, solid advice. It's not like it's scientific, I guess you could say. It comes down. It's a yes or no. It is kind of binary. And like you said, I think that a lot of people who are in this industry because it's creative don't like I don't want to say rules associated with it, but there's
light is math.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Light is math. Yeah. You can't get around that.
So my best friend is a mechanical engineer, and she happened to be in town for my baby shower 3 years ago. And I was teaching a camera 101 course. And I was like, you're just going to sit in and it's going to be great. And at one point, one of the students raises their hand and goes, if I had known how much math was going to be involved, I would not have gotten into this. And my best friend, the mechanical engineer, goes, if I had known how much math was involved, I would have gotten into this years ago. Like, it's just two different brains, in two different ways. So.
Oh man, that's funny. I remember when the listeners know, I got into photography through cinematography. And in high school, I did my senior project on cinematography. And I remember putting in that time and like researching like, what is cinematography? What do you need to know as a cinematographer? And I remember that when I really started studying light, I thought to myself, I don't know if I could do this. Like, I got into this because I didn't want to have to do math. I didn't want to have to write like essays and stuff. Right. And it was really scary. But yes. I'm glad that it's... like you said, once you really learn it, it becomes second nature. Right. I want to know, though, I want to transition a little bit more into what you do today, right? You do a lot of birth photography.
I do.
So I want to know, in your own words, what would you say is the job description of a birth photographer?
Birth photography is photojournalism. So it's drastically different from portrait work because you're working in somebody else's workspace. Somebody else's office, place of business, which is the hospital room. So it does not belong to you. It is not your studio. It is not your set. You don't get to direct what direction people are looking in. You don't get to direct where the light is. It's built in. Like you show up and you shoot what's available and you make the most of it. And one thing that I think a lot of new photographers struggle with when they venture into births is how involved to be with the scene as opposed to being like a fly on the wall. And that is something that my students know I harp on hardcore is when in doubt, stop talking. And that is my number one rule for my for my birth photographer students is when you are in a birth situation, like, stop talking and just use your camera. And you don't need to be an expert and correcting nurses and asking questions of doctors and asking, what's going on with the epidural and what's going on and, trying to be an extra family member in the room rather being, and that's not to say like, don't make yourself part of the community because you very much become a trusted member of the tribe that's in there with mom. And so it's a delicate balance of like earning their trust beforehand, being a trusted person in the room with them that they, and many of my clients have said on camera, it's like having another friend in there, but from your own standpoint, you are not in there to be like, okay, what are you doing to her now? Like, what does that monitor do? What does that button do? What is that beeping noise? Like, no, like stop, just sit there quietly and take the pictures. But it is like weddings, for anybody that's shot weddings before, it is definitely, you get one shot, you don't get a reshoot, and you got to nail it. And so you got to be prepared. And like you were saying, your background's in cinematography. My background is in sports television. So it's live, like it happens, you got it or you didn't. And, I think 15 years in sports television has prepared me both for weddings and births in that, like, okay, get prepped, hurry up and wait. And then when the moment comes, you are there to nail it, and you're there to nail it right. So, I shoot with 2 camera bodies with 2 different lenses, metered at 2 different lights, depending on multiple lights in the room, so that camera's ready for that spot, that camera's ready for that spot, and you can switch really fast. I got my spider holster around my waist, so I can like, this is Texas, so it's like, and so I'm ready for whatever happens. And so, it's very much a case of prepare, wait, go, and then you never get it back. So,
so many things you said there are just like totally resonated with me. I love it. Everything that you shared there. A quick story. I know that obviously I'm interviewing you, but I think that this really pertains to the listeners here is with your experience going into a room and hearing of other photographers either trying to help in a situation. I see that a lot of times at weddings as well, right? Because a wedding has a lot of cogs, right? No, that's not the right term. It has a lot of moving pieces, okay?
Yeah.
And I've seen on several occasions photographers try to let me help do this, let me do that, let me do this thing for you. Right. And while it seems helpful in the moment, you're doing 2 things. You're I would say devaluing yourself by doing that, because you're no longer doing your job. And that kind of shows this feeling of like, I'm not proving my worth right in this moment, so I have to show my worth somewhere else.
Right.
And that's what let me move these centerpieces for you and stuff kind of does. And then the other thing is that it stops you from taking photographs, which is your job. And that's why you're there. So I'm glad to hear that it's not just at weddings and that it's in other industries as well. But I want to know.
I don't even shoot a wedding without a wedding planner anymore. Like, unless it's an elopement with less than 30 people, because I got to the point where I was having to play wedding planner that, ridiculous, like to ridiculous levels. And I'm like, all right, that's not my job. That's not what I'm. So
I really hate to say it, but it's like, I just don't do it. You know what I mean? Like I've had a mother of the bride asked me to go help straighten out the aisle runner, and I looked at her like, I literally said, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but I said, I think that's above my pay grade, and then I just I walked away, because it's that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to capture these moments that the bride and the groom are having. And in your case, I'm here to capture this birth of this child that you've been waiting for so long. And I'm totally going on a diatribe right now. And I'm
No, I'm with you. I totally agree. I actually saw a thread in a wedding photography group the other day where the bride called and asked the photographer to cook some dishes because they had talked about Irish cooking, and she was like, oh yeah, I do some Irish cooking. And she called and was like, would you make some dishes for the wedding? And it was a 400 comment thread of all these photographers being like, what?
Oh, that's so strange. That's so strange. And I think to myself sometimes, it's why are these people asking this? Is it just a lack of education? Or is it?
There's some of that, and there's so many photographer, like you said, there's a barrier to entry, and we are willing to say yes. And this is, I think it's actually it's a bigger issue, not to put this wedge between it, but I've been doing a lot of discovery calls with photographers lately on what their biggest struggle is getting their business started. And the biggest thing that I see when I speak to women is validating their value to themselves to charge legitimate prices. And we as a society of women are taught to be very accommodating and helpful and polite, and therefore sometimes struggle with saying, this is what I do, this is what it costs, take it or leave it, have a great day, because we want to be very accommodating, we want to be very helpful. Well, maybe they can't afford it. Well, that's not your problem. You're running a business. Yeah. And that's something that I see so many photographers struggle with daily.
Many listeners, I can tell you personally, so many listeners right now, and I know this from just being in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, are listening and they're thinking, yes, this is me. This is totally me. I have that problem. So,
yeah. And it's a mindset shift. It's a change in, in legitimizing, if I'm going to actually run a business, I need to start thinking of myself as any other business in this community, whether you have brick and mortar or not. Like, walk into a cafe. Are they going to be like, I'm not sure you can afford that cup of coffee, I'm going to make it discounted for you. And you said nothing. Like, and then I had a student the other day say, well, I don't think they're going to pay it because they've never paid it before. And I said, did you ask them to? Like, they're not going to say, I'm going to pay you 4 times what you asked. Like, if you didn't ask for it, they're not going to pay it. Like, how do you know they're not going to pay it if you didn't ask them to? So, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. But, it's a personal worth thing you have to overcome from a mindset standpoint.
Do you know Tim Ferriss?
Uh-huh.
Tim Ferriss. So Tim Ferriss has this, I don't want to say it's a trick or a hack or whatever, but he says to get over the fear of rejection, put yourself in a situation where you will be rejected. And his best example is to go to Starbucks and ask for a discount. Go to like Target, ask for a discount. Go to all these places and ask for a discount, because the answer is going to be no.
Right.
And over time, that's going to, I guess, strengthen your shield, so that when somebody asks you for a discount, you can be like, no, and then it's just not as awkward.
Right.
I have yet to try it, but I could see how it would be effective. Absolutely. I want to know, you obviously talk to a lot of photographers, those starting out, and you also teach birth photography. I want to know if there are any misconceptions that most people are surprised to find out about a birth photographer.
Like for clients to find out, or for...
No, from like other photographers.
I think photographers struggle to wrap their brain around being on call. Because you can't schedule it. A birth is a birth. So you're going to, have to limit how many you can take, because you don't want 2 women in labor at the same time.
Of course.
You're going to have to be prepared, if you have small children, to leave in the middle of the night and not have like chaos break out in the morning when they wake up and you're not there. They still have to be able to get to school. They still, your spouse or your partner still has to be able to get to work, and all those things. So if you don't have a system in place to handle that, that can be a little bit jarring. And then in order to cover all of those things, in order to be there for possibly 24 to 30 hours, or sometimes you'll be there 5 hours, sometimes you'll be there 30 hours. Like, just kind of depends. It depends on like whether you shoot more hospital births or home births, or what kind of birth culture exists in your market, because it varies drastically from market to market. You have to price yourself to be able to cover those kind of hours. And that means that you have to price it almost, if not more than a wedding would be as well. And some people are not prepared to ask that. Some people are not prepared for the backlash they might get from uneducated clients about what birth photography is going to cost. But imagine going to a bride or a bride coming to you and saying, we want you to shoot our wedding. We might elope for an hour, or we might have a 30-hour wedding. You're just going to have to deal with it when you get there. We don't know when it's going to be. We don't know how long it's going to be. We don't know how many people are going to be there. We don't know, but just be prepared. Like, what would you charge her? You'd either tell her to go fly a kite, or you charge her like 10 grand. Now, 10 grand isn't realistic in most markets for, to book 2 a month. Some places you could, but you have to cover your costs. And so even for very, very, very first time, like I tell my students, I have a group on this, which all that I know will be in your show notes, but I tell them, like, do not even shoot your first birth with an anchor price of less than $1,000. Now, if you're doing a model call and you are willing to take 500, then, do it where you say, like, we're adding births, normally at least 1,000. For these particular criteria, you can apply for the 50% off model call and shoot it for 500. But like, I don't ever want you to put out to the market that this is something they can get for less than 4 figures.
Right.
Because to go home and then edit all of that after all of the time you've put in and the bonding you've put in with the client and the back and forth and the emails and the, how are you feeling and what did the doctor say today and all that kind of stuff, you can't price it less than that. And, make sure your kids are covered and make sure your life is covered. And your other clients, if you're running a portrait studio, and you have to disrupt your studio schedule to go shoot a birth. Like all of that has to be factored into your pricing.
So, so many questions after that. I guess the biggest one would be, how do you, I guess the real first one would be, how many births do you try to schedule in a month? Like, what's your max?
I won't take more than 2 unless my backup photographer I know is 100% like gonna be there the whole month.
Sure. That makes sense.
Because she and her husband are like in retirement age. She's actually like dissolving her business this year, kind of absorbing it into mine, and then she'll be kind of an associate photographer for me. And so because they travel a good bit, I know when I take a birth, like whether she's going to be in town, whether I'm going to be in town the whole month, like where we would need backup coverage, all that kind of stuff. So if she's available, I might take a third. If one of those 3 or 2 are a scheduled C-section for like a second time C-section where they, then I might take 4, but that would be like absolute cap out. And they would have to be like scheduled induction C-sections that like the only chance they would not be on that day is if something crazy happened and, whatever. And if I got into a situation where I had 3 women in labor at the same time, like I have some other photographers here that I know have taken my course. They're, like I would trust them to like represent my brand well, to cover a catastrophic 3 women in labor at the same time. Like it's crazy, but, and we've never been in that situation, but like, so generally 2 is my, is my number.
So I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to take more than that either. The amount of stress is just terrifying to me. So much more so than a wedding. Jeez.
Well, and you have those crazy dreams, like, the dreams that you have the night before the wedding of like the things you visualize that could go wrong. I had one the other night. I have a scheduled C-section on Wednesday. And it's the 3rd that I've done with this mama. So all 3 have been C-sections. And I had a dream that she had an impromptu VBAC, like home birth, like with just me and the dad at her house, like terrible dream. And I woke up the next morning. I was like, please don't do that. I'll be back Wednesday.
No, I get it. Oh man. Yeah. Those work dreams they're just the worst, because you wake up and you're like, I take this so seriously. And here I am. I was in such like this vulnerable, spot in my dream. It's terrifying. Yeah.
Enjoying today's interview with Raymond's guest? Want to hear their full interview and gain access to more monthly educational photography tutorials? Become a premium member of the podcast. There is no commitment and you can cancel at any time. To sign up, head over to patreon.com/beginner photography podcast or by clicking the banner on beginnerphotographypodcast.com. Sign up and start taking better photos today. Now, let's get back to the interview with Raymond's guest.
How do you keep from getting in the way of doctors and nurses delivering the baby and still get images that the family will love?
So in my video course, I actually have, sorry about that. My son's birthday is tomorrow, so all the presents are coming in. In my video course, I have demonstration videos. I actually convinced the local medical school to let us into their demonstration facilities. So there's a mannequin that teaches doctors how to deliver babies.
Yes,
like
I've seen this. Yeah,
seen this because your wife's a nurse. Yes.
Yeah.
So
it's crazy to look at. It's the weirdest thing. Yeah.
Her name's Teresa. Like it was a whole thing. And so it's called a simulation mom. And so for my education course, I did a deal with the medical school, and they let us come in and they gave us an operator, because there's like a control room in the next room where like they operate the mannequin, and the mannequin like moans and contracts and births baby and all that kind of thing. And so I show like my choreography, and I kind of do like a crescent shape from like foot to foot, unless there's like a table in the way, and then I pick a side that I can see dad's face and see mom's face, and then I show like I use this length of lens because I'm standing in this area, and I use this length of lens to try to get a meter for dad's face so that we get that reaction. And so it's very similar to how you like navigate a wedding ceremony of like, you're staying out of the way, you're not, everybody can still see, you're not like jumping in front of people.
I jump in front of people all the time.
Do you?
No,
yeah.
No. That'd be the worst wedding.
You're that guy.
Side note, did you see this video that's like going around Facebook right now of it was at a wedding. I'm so sorry to interrupt you there. That was so rude. it's a wedding photographer at a wedding, and she's photographing the couple. It's their first kiss, and the mother of the groom steps like directly in front of the photographer, and the photographer apparently is so fed up because apparently she had done this before that she just like checks her to get out of the way. Yeah, and then the mom like goes back to her seat, and I guess I read this on Petapixel today. The bride like. Huge kudos to the photographer. She's like, I hate my mother-in-law. Like, this is the best part of the whole wedding day. I was like, wow, how horrible.
I'm glad it went that way.
Yeah, that's so. But I guess she had said things like earlier in the day of like, you're not doing a good job, like as a photographer. The photographer's like, you haven't seen anything. How do you know what I'm? Once again, I'm rambling on. I apologize.
No, but it happens, and it also happens here because you don't know. Like every hospital has different policies on how many people are allowed in, and like you might get grandma and aunt so and so like it might be some of the cultures like they want everybody in there, and so you're having to navigate around a lot of people, and so it's something I discuss with the family at their consultation, like how many people do you plan to have, and like who do I need to be aware of, and is there somebody that's going to be the problem child, or like I've had some that's like, ignore my sister, she thinks she knows everything, I'm gonna kick her out, blah blah blah. Like, so who the party players are beforehand, and where the tension is, and if there's like divorced grandparents and like the girlfriend's coming and like all that kind of stuff. And so
girlfriend,
like divorced grandparents, girlfriend.
Oh, I see.
But you never know, because that's happened before too. And then sometimes oh yeah, I'm sure you have seen it all. Like
I've heard some pretty crazy stories, but this isn't about me at all. No, it's strange, the dynamic that can happen inside of that delivery room, and being a father of two myself, I know just from hearing from other nurses that's like, oh, you're the most normal people, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like
right.
We're just acting like I guess like respectful, like you're doing your job. And anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. I'm sorry.
But there's no license to have a child, so you get everybody in there, and so you see all the kinds of family dynamics that exist.
Yeah. So the city here in Indiana that we live in, like used to be this big like GM, General Motors used to like run this town, and then they. Like late 80s, I believe, they just moved everything to Canada. Like, so this whole economy in this town just like went downhill. And just like 10 years later, this city that I live in, I probably shouldn't be sharing this, is like the meth capital of Indiana. Yeah. So you can imagine the types of children that I guess my wife has to give. So I've heard all of those stories, and it just it's insane, and it's sad when you hear things like that. I just shared way too much right there, and I'm not sure why I did. I'm in a university
town, so I actually do get clients who are still students, and like I've had some that like. So I did the newborn session like in their place on Frat Row, like okay, but like you're gonna see all kinds, and that's another misconception that we have in the marketing world of like who your target client actually is, because a lot of times the people who come in and value it the most and actually end up paying more are not the Bentleys in the $20 million house. Those people might actually nickel and dime you more than the ones who are on like a night shift, like hourly wage, that are just really value this and really want to, have this of their child. And so when you're creating your marketing, there's often a discrepancy between who you think your target client is and who your target client actually is. So, yeah.
That was a really great recovery from that, from everything that we just talked about there. So thank you for saving that, because I had no idea where I was going with that, and I'm glad that I didn't have to deal with that. I'm gonna have to bring you on the podcast more often. This is so wonderful.
I'm
in. Being there, we talk a lot about the high stress.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot about the unknowns. Whatever's up to the doctor, whether you can and can't shoot. What would you say is the hardest part of your job, and how do you handle
it? I like to eat.
It can be hard to leave the room and eat, huh?
Hard to leave. leave, and I always have like multiple granola bars in my bag, and like, but you don't want to eat anything smelly in the room because it's just meat that you can't eat, and like
no curry, huh?
Yeah, one time my husband had to bring me Chick-fil-A because I've been there forever and I was just starving, and like poor thing, like he had to like hide from the family in the waiting room because they hadn't gotten an update, and like it's not our place to give an update, and they were like, "Do you know anything?" And he was like, "No, I just brought that chicken." And so, but yeah, I think honestly the hardest part is can sometimes be managing the family because, especially if mom and mother-in-law don't get along, and mother-in-law is like nosing in and butting in and being really annoying, and mom doesn't feel like she is in a position to like ask her to leave or whatever. Like sometimes I'll like clue in the nurse, like maybe ask mom if she would like you to ask grandma to leave. Like if I'm picking up those vibes, occasionally I might make that nudge because mom seems really like not in her best place. And like, so I'm her advocate a little bit to that extent. But other than that, like, yeah, I mean, it can be hard. You're there for 30 hours. You're entering into somebody else's world, their family with their, all the family's expectations and drama and history and all those kinds of things. So, but then you get to go home and leave them at that. So
yeah. So I had two follow-up questions real quick. One being, is 30 hours the longest the longest labor that you've encountered?
Yeah. So the market in my area does, the majority of people that deliver in the birthing center or at home are doing it for financial reasons. Mm-hmm. And so it's very rare that they're going to also pay to hire me when they are, they're doing that basically out of pocket. Whereas if I was 2 hours east in Austin, it's much more like it's a higher income thing to do birthing centers and home births in Austin because it's, for lack of a better word, a higher income crunchy world. And that's just not the market that I'm in. And so the majority of my births are hospital births. And so they like to move things along because at the end of the day, they're a business. And so they like to like keep it moving and encourage interventions. And, like it is what it is. There's a zillion different opinions on like the hospital birth world and how it should go and how it doesn't.
Oh no, this is not that podcast.
Yeah, this is not that podcast. But because of where I am and where I'm working, it's rare that I have one go more, that I'm there for more than like 12 hours.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
But yes, I have had one or two go as long as that, where, they just were like, we're not intervening with anything. I just want to lay here and labor as long as I labor, and, hands off. And so that's when you can get into the longer ones and the 30-hour ones, or if you're doing a home or birthing center birth, where there's way fewer interventions, way fewer checks, way fewer of any of those things. So.
Yeah. How do you know when you're done? Like, oh, baby's here, like time to go, like 15 minutes after baby leaves, or?
No, baby's there is when it all gets started, because they have like, the hospital that I'm at, they have like up to as long a skin to skin as you want to have a nurse before they ever like do any kind of cleanup or let in other family or move you to the next room. And so I stay until whatever family members are present wanted pictures have done. So it's generally about 3 hours post delivery. Yeah, because it's the skin to skin, it's nursing, it's like footprints and measurements and all that kind of stuff. And then like all the grandparents want to come in and get the picture of the baby in their first day. And, the sibling coming in, sometimes they get their own like half hour with just the sibling meeting baby for the first time and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, the majority of what I do actually happens after the actual delivery. So it's usually about 3 hours.
How many, now we're getting kind of into like the nitty gritty here, but I'm just like curious about how many photos do you deliver from a birth?
It depends on how long I'm there, but, and how many family members are present and whatnot, but I guarantee, I guarantee about 60 to 150 is like what I give them as an expectation window. Now, if I'm there a lot longer, they have like waves of family coming in or whatnot, or like something really interesting like changed or happened or whatever, like I might do more. But generally like finished collection.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear, because obviously as somebody who shoots long events like weddings, I was just curious if it would still be, I think they say like the average for a wedding photographer is like a photo a minute. Like that's about how many photos you'll get. And I would imagine for 30 hours, like, they're just sitting in the bed, it's
exactly.
not like there's multiple
and like
locations.
at some point, a lot of that time is just sitting, and like there's only so many where they're like sitting there on Facebook or watching TV or eating Jell-O. So
at a wedding, I've never been on Facebook or anything like that, because that's not why I'm there. But like as a birth photographer, do you have that time to just kind of sit there and you did? Wow.
Yeah, I actually, well, I mean, it depends on the birth, but the ones where you're there a long time, like, and literally they're just like sitting, they want to take a nap, or they want to, or like get out of my face, I'm laboring hard or whatever. I have books on my iPad, and or like Rosetta Stone, or I sit in the corner and do something quiet, like make sure it's not something that makes noise. But yeah, I always have something prepped to entertain myself quietly in the corner.
It sounds like you have something prepped to educate yourself. It's not even just entertainment. It's like you're learning new languages, it sounds like.
I'm an education junkie, so that's hence all the things. Like
Well, it sounds like everything that you have been doing is obviously working out very well. Your reviews are great online, and I've taken way more time than I should have than we've allotted for today, which seems to be happening a lot recently. I should definitely figure this out.
No, there's lots of information, so just extend your time window.
It really is. I think that we should have made this a 2-part episode, because I still have so many questions to ask.
We can do it.
But I have one last question for you today. Yeah. Is that okay? You got time?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Have you ever had an embarrassing moment at a birth that you'd be happy to share? And how did you handle it?
Well, I've had it almost really bad. So one of the things that I cover in my video course is choreography in the OR during a C-section.
Sorry, dealing with what?
Choreography, like your
choreography. Okay, yeah.
In the operating room during a C-section. And a lot of the machines have tubes that come from the wall to the table. And so I teach high knees, and I teach that from experience, because you don't want to get your foot caught on like suction.
Sure, yeah. Or like an oxygen tube or something.
Yeah, that's not good.
Did that happen?
It didn't like come out, but I caught myself. And I basically just like, I caught myself, I composed myself, I looked up, and the nurse was looking at me over her mask, and I was like, I'm going to go over there.
So you didn't even get the shot. After all that, you weren't even able to get the shot.
Well, I was like traveling to like check out a new area for a new spot. So it was just like in trans. I never shoot in the OR without like squaring your feet and like planting your feet, because you don't want to be moving in the OR while you're shooting and not paying attention where you're going, because you can. I think that's probably, I don't know, I may have blocked something out.
You know what? That's probably like the happiest embarrassing moment, because it's like you realize that there could have been a problem. Yeah, it could have been a terrible moment, and luckily you saved yourself for sure. Yeah. Well, Ashely, that's it. That's all that I got for you today. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure that the listeners know, or if not, tell the listeners where they can find you online?
I think the biggest thing that I've definitely talked about every time I've done any kind of teaching or interview on birth photography is that the beautiful thing about it is that it's never going to get old. You're never going to get bored. It's never going to be the same thing twice. And something new and fascinating happens every time. And so that's one thing when it comes to like picking your genre, to find something that's not going to get stale on you, that you're not going to be like, I've done this so many times in my life, I'm so over it, I'm not creatively challenged anymore. Because we get into this looking for creative challenges, and if you get to the point where you've done something so many times it doesn't creatively challenge you anymore, you get bored, then it's not worth it. Then you got into it, for different reasons. So this is definitely something that will help bridge that gap and find something that, you can grab onto, and it's never going to get boring like that. But there is a lot of waiting time, so it's a balancing act. But as far as me, my website with links to everything I do, my courses, the birth photography course, the digital marketing for photographers course, I have a book on Amazon, which is birth photography, the art and business of labor and delivery photography. There's links to everything on my website, ashelysiegert.com. Siegert. So ashelysiegert.com has links to everything. All my social media, everything is right there. The birth course, everything. And then I do boot camps occasionally. And so I also have a Facebook group that is open to any and all photographers. The name of the group is the Business of Portrait and Birth Photography Ashely Diamond Siegert. So just search my name, you'll find whatever. And so all photographers are welcome in there. And that's where I announce when I run a new round of boot camps. And then I also do one-on-one mentoring for any photographers that are ready to hit the gas. And I always say, only the hungry need apply. I will kick your butt and take no prisoners, but I'm very nice about it. So that's once you're ready to get over the fear of charging what you're worth and really put a business structure in place that's going to serve your family and bring home real income, then let's chat. I can help.
That sounds like a challenge. I love it. That's so awesome. Ashely, again, I will, of course, put links to everything in the show notes as well today. But thank you so much for coming on, giving way more of your time than you allowed me to in the beginning, and sharing everything that you did. Yeah, I know. I'm speechless. I got nothing else to say. Again, Ashely, you really changed my mind about a lot of things when it came to birth, and you really helped me out, and I really appreciate it. And I know that the listeners are going to get value too. So, once again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Man, after hearing everything that Ashely shared, I'm not going to lie, I am more intrigued than ever about birth photography. Like I said there, it's something that I've never considered at all. And to be honest, I'm still not. I just don't think that that's a job for me. That's not a... one of the reasons, and I know that I've told this on the podcast before, one of the reasons why when I was working like a traditional desk job, 9-to-5 type job, one of the reasons that I wanted to leave so bad was there's just something inside of me that's like, I don't want to sell my time, unless it's on my terms. And that's why I love being a photographer, because I can sell my time on my terms. And I think being on call all the time, my wife also, as you heard in this interview, is an OB nurse, and one day a week she's on call, and it's like that day she's home, but we can't really do anything because if they call her in, she's got to go like right then, and that's just not something that I could do. But there's a lot of you out there who probably could, who could love doing that, love the excitement, just like a firefighter or something like that. I think it's so cool, but again, it's just not for me. So I'm so glad that there are people in the world like Ashely who are doing this and providing this service to people who truly want it. So Ashely, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing everything that you did. It was so much more than I expected. I really want to know, for you, the listeners, what your biggest takeaway was from Ashely, especially from those of you who aren't birth photographers. So feel free to share your takeaway in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. Create that discussion. And if you have a question about today's interview, you can always ask. So, okay, that is it for today's interview. Join me next week where I will be back to the future. I hope that that's not trademarked. Okay, anyway, keep shooting, stay safe. I love you all.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.